Sue and Craig have equity in their home, plus some savings in the bank. They decided to buy a second property as a tenanted investment. They got advice from Toowoomba's Edge Lending, because Edge Lending are the experts in borrowing to buy investment property.
Hey everyone, Scott from Edge Specialist Advice Network. I hope you're all well. Hey, today we've got another installment of What the Numbers Say, and as usual we're using Visual Capitalist. And so today we are looking at the size of the NATO armies broken up into the sections of the countries, Ukraine and also Russia. So I guess the European war that has been going on, or the special military operation that's been going on since 2022, it's not quite a full-blown. Well, it's definitely a war. It's not quite a multi-participant war. It's really just NATO versus Russia at the moment. But let's have a look at the size of the military, or the state of military. So here we go. So active military personnel across NATO. Now, when you say active military personnel, you know that is not all frontline military soldiers. It is a lot of, I guess, high command, a lot of generals getting paid a lot of money, a lot of brass and other things. It could be a lot of trainers. It's paid clerks. It's logistics people. It's a lot of people making sure that the trains run on time, kind of thing. It's a lot of administration. A lot of people back in very safe areas doing some of their military work. Let's have a bit of a look here, and I wanted to take a bit of an understanding about what the size of the challenge is for some of these countries if they want to actually try and punch Russia in the stomach. So this is the blue side is the total enlisted personnel in the militaries that make up NATO. Now, NATO was formed quite a long time ago, so back in the early 90s, and its whole stated purpose, its mission purpose, its reason for existing was to be a challenge to Russia. So the only reason NATO exists is to fight Russia or defend from Russian aggression. So either or. Okay, so that's how that would work. That's the reason that it exists. Sorry, guys. That's only my wife, so I hung up on it. You guys are more important. All right, so that's the only reason that exists, right? And so when I look at this and you go, oh, wow, the US is 1.3 million enlisted military, and they've got, but they're not fully ensconced in NATO. Look, they fund NATO to the hilt substantially. They don't really militarize it very often with a lot of soldiers that are on the front line. They have a lot of bases. There's 800 US military bases across the world. A lot of them are in Europe, so there's a couple of huge ones in Germany and Poland, and you get a lot of people who get paid a lot of money to cruise around and play army effectively. And if a war breaks out, they love it, because that's what they're all trained for. They love doing it. They're not actually in the front lines. They're probably 45, 50, 55, all these stars everywhere, and they just love the excitement of, getting back into battle. There's a lot of money being outpoured here. You can understand why NATO is freaking out when the US is going, look, if you guys don't pay your own way, if you guys don't start funding some of this in an equal portion to the size of your economy, so it was supposed to be 2%, but Trump has asked for 5%. Spend 5% of your gross domestic product on funding your own military, so my taxpayers don't have to keep propping you up, and then you guys can stop thumping your chest all the time on our money. Thump your chest on your own money. That's what you should be doing. So you can see why they're freaking out, because if the US removes itself from NATO, then NATO looks pretty tiny and a little bit disjointed, by the way, as well. You understand why just being the biggest dog in there held so much control. But with that, all the little participants in NATO were not funding their way, and they weren't really basically paying to protect themselves. And so what did these countries do with the extra money that they didn't have to protect themselves? They let people have pensions at age 55 or 60 or 62. Then you can just, that's like France and all those places. They don't really work. Everything's on. It's a big social program because they don't have to think about taxing everyone to spend on military. Trump has said, hey, you guys start spending or we're out. At the same time, look how big Russia's army is, 1.5 million. So, but it's also right there. It's right there in Europe. It is really Europe. It's Eurasia, okay? Whereas the US is all the way back in, I guess the base, you should say, or the command center should be in the United States of America. But of this 1.3 million US personnel, there's 800 military bases all across the world. They're not all sitting in Europe. Russia's all sitting in Europe. Russia has 2 military bases. I think one's in Africa and one might be in Turkmenistan Syria. Okay. Right. So, and China has 1 military base that's outside of its country. Russia has 2. US has 810 spread across. So you can understand why the US is going, hey, we're spread really thin. We're paying all this money. We're bankrupt. We're effectively, not bankrupt in the sense that we've got assets we can sell. We can sell Yosemite Park, we can sell our gold, we can do a lot of stuff. We can sell our ports and all our oil, but we don't want to do that. We've got no cash flow, and somebody's pulling our credit card, which is really so. We've got to cut back somewhere. We're waiting for a war with China. We're in a war with Russia by proxy. We've been funding the war in Ukraine, which was a failed investment. We've lost all this money. We're not going to get it back. And we're also backing Israel to go and start a big war in the Middle East. We can't do all three. We really probably can't do one, but we're going to have a crack at doing at least two. We're going to pull out of Europe. We're going to concentrate on the Middle East, and we're going to concentrate on getting ready for China. So all this stuff's really horrible, guys. But having big militaries begets war, right? Which comes first, the military or the war? It's chicken and egg. So once you have a military, well, you've kind of got to have a war, otherwise it doesn't make sense. So let's start a war somewhere. Kind of what it is. Let's get some more capital for the banking families. So you got 1.5 billion here. See, this 880,000 Ukraine, I question, and I think these are really old numbers. The Ukraine army is basically gone. Proper reports from across, multiple reports that I've heard from people who are allowed to tell the truth. It sounds like there's 1.1 to 1.2 million Ukrainian soldiers dead. And a lot of that was because early on, you had like 300, 400,000 military dead in Ukraine. They ran out of men. They started conscripting people. People fled. So about 20 million Ukrainians left the country, probably never to come back. And so they started pulling men between 16 and 60 off the street. They'd go to nightclubs, bar the exits, grab all the men, put them into vans, take them away to give them 2 or 3 weeks training from the front line. They'll be dead in 2 days. And so that's where they kept churning through all these soldiers. And I'm thinking about, it might take 5 years, it might take 10 years. Eventually the real numbers will come out, and this will be one of the biggest wartime death counts, probably much larger than Vietnam. And it's all been, unfortunately, this one's all been hidden. But look at this again. But let's pretend this is correct. Let's pretend Ukraine is correct. Ukraine isn't in NATO, but NATO has been arming it and funding it, and the US, the past administrations have been as well. So you can see, like, 880, it looks pretty big. It looks pretty strong. You would think that if 1.3 million of the US and Ukraine joined together, even though this 1.3 million is spread across 800 military bases across the world and is a long way away in their home country, you might have 200,000 US troops in there to add to this. So you can see that just as a war of attrition, it just isn't there. But you might say, well, US has got all these crazy tech, space rockets and things like that. Yeah, Russia and China have proven that they have the best military tech at the moment that can't be stopped by the US. That's a problem. That's a problem. It is probably one of the real reasons that the US isn't going full on in. They know they're out-teched militarily, and they're going to lose a lot of men, and probably lose again. They haven't won a war since World War II. They've started nearly all of them since then, and they haven't won any. So, they probably know it's time to, I guess, lick their wounds, pull back, reassess, rebuild their army. It will take about 20 years, but then they want to go and have a crack at China. It might be too late by then. But then you go, okay, well, Russia looks kind of all on its own here. I'm seeing a lot of blue sky, a lot of NATO. If they all got together and, then they all joined Ukraine, they could be, you know what? They could knock Russia over. They could just knock them straight over. Well, don't forget that Russia and China have signed a security pact, an actual security agreement. What it means is if one of us is officially at war, because Russia isn't officially at war, there's a special military operation, and NATO has been very, 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 very careful not to do this thing where we're at war. Because otherwise, Russia would just be able to bomb London, straight up with a missile. Those arrestic missiles that can't be stopped, because they're at Mach 9, and when they land so hard that it's like a meteor hitting, and it creates an earthquake. Sometimes there's not even a warhead on there; they don't need it. Just imagine like this big bit of tungsten flying down at Mach 9 into the ground, creating an earthquake, and every building falls over. It's just amazing. And by doing that, you haven't broken a nuclear treaty because there's not even a warhead on there realistically. This is pretty nuts. Like the tech that they showed that they had there, they showed a bit of their hand a while back, and they launched one of the arrestic missiles. They're unstoppable. They scared the pants off NATO and the US. They know they haven't got anything that can stop it. So you're like, oh shit, let's keep Ukraine fighting, but let's not try and say that NATO's in the war, because once NATO's in the war, then we're allowed to be attacked. So we should be very careful and very, very cautious with our wording, and all the NATO soldiers we send in there, we've got to take the badges off their shoulders and stick a Ukrainian badge on, a little bit of Velcro there. It all works really well. But let's go back to the security agreement that Russia has signed with China, and not forgetting Iran in the Middle East. So this is going to be an issue as well. But if we add in China's army, so I've just Googled this before. How large is China's army? 2 million 2 million active personnel. Now, China does not have any, is not spread across the globe militarily. There is only one outside China military base, not 800 like the US, and they have 2 million active personnel. So if you took Russia's 1.5 million, if you started a proper war with Russia and you triggered their security agreement with China and their 2 million, you're talking about 3.5. It's just like going to dwarf NATO. So if NATO went to war with Russia, and this is why they're not, they're going to capitulate. They're going to talk a lot. They're going to capitulate. They're going to have a little grind out. They'll throw a lot of soldiers in there to keep dying, to keep it sort of just on the front line, do this, do that. But they don't want to fall on war, because as soon as China steps in with their 2 million, Russia with their 1.5 million, nobody, and the US really knows that it's smart enough to pull out, so we can focus on the Middle East war it wants to have, with it using Israel, and then potentially later on wanted to really use one, have a war with China and use Taiwan. You can see why they're just going to let this go. So, I guess the reason and while we always want to talk about how this affects us in investments, I wanted to show you the scale of what is going on. And so when you say there's a new world order, yeah, there's a new world order. And so whether you think Trump's a genius or the devil, he is at least smart enough to know that they can't win this. And so they've got to look strong, but slowly pull out and try and not lose. They can't keep funding it, but they need to kind of look like they're pivoting. And then basically, I think what they're going to do is they're going to try and trick the EU into funding the war that the EU actually wants. The US doesn't really want this war. They're not going to gain anything, but the EU wants this. So the US is going to trick them into being all brave and nationalistic, into funding their own war against Russia and sending their soldiers to die. And some of the triggers are that Poland has just talked about doing conscription, and so has Sweden. So Turkey already has conscription for a couple of years. Military generals that are retired have been doing big 2-page op-eds in newspapers in London explaining why it is inevitable that they will just have to go back to conscripting young Britons to go and fight specifically. Then they say the word Russia. In Russia, so we're going to have to fight them in Russia, otherwise they'll be over here fighting us. It's kind of the same old thing that you would have heard a long time ago, reminiscent of Vietnam. So that's why I think the US doesn't want to be involved in that. I think they'll let Europe walk in, bold as brass, and get really smashed up. And that probably eliminates one of the US's actual competitors. You can see that. And so I guess if you thought your neighbor was going to war because you've decided you're not going to stick up for him anymore, and your neighbor is sitting on a heap of cash that you've lent him, but it's in his top drawer, and you know that he's going to have a big fight at home with all the other neighbors that are actually on the ground, you get your cash out. So what's been happening is the US has been signaling and removing all of their gold from the Bank of London, because if the UK loses a war, then they lose their gold, which is actually the US's gold, but the US won't get it back either. So, and chicken and egg scenario. Normally, or what's been happening in the past, when I listen to very smart people, and Martin Armstrong is one of the ones I listen to in relation to this, who says that capital lets you know what's happening. Capital moves before the war starts. Somehow the capital always knows. So all the gold always moves into safety before somewhere goes into military turmoil. And so all the gold's leaving London, and then you have London talking about doing conscription. Then you have London talking about we've got to go and put soldiers on the ground in Ukraine because there's no Ukrainian soldiers left. Then you have Poland talking about conscription. You have Germany talking about conscription. Sweden talking about conscription. UK is talking about conscription. You know that, and all the gold's leaving, all the money's leaving. You're like, right, it's on. Okay, so sounds pretty scary. One thing I will say is that we're at a pivot point where we either move towards the US or we move towards the UK. We are owned by the UK still. Every time when a politician is sworn in, he swears allegiance to the Crown, to the King. The Governor General, who's the King's representative, is who lets them come into Parliament. And right on cue, the very first week that Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, said that they were going to send boots on the ground into Ukraine, Anthony Albanese said, "Yep, I would definitely consider sending peacekeeping troops, Australian soldiers who are actually already there in a training scenario, but Australian frontline soldiers into Ukraine." So there is no such thing as peacekeeping. It is just like, hey, we're going to send men because the war there's no peace to keep. The war's still going. You can't have a peacekeeping troop if the war's still on. Peacekeeping means the war's finished, but you just want to make sure it doesn't restart. Okay, the war is not finished. I don't think they're going to have a ceasefire at all. I don't think the EU and Ukraine want one. I think Russia would probably be happy to have one, but they're going to keep rolling forward to the Dnieper River, and where they're going to dig in. And so you look at that and you go, okay, well, geez, that's pretty full on. And the reason why I've just taken 10 minutes to explain this to you is to explain that there's going to be a variety of outcomes that's going to happen if we have whether you call it a proxy war, whether you call it like NATO versus Russia, whether you call it European war, Russian war, whatever you want to call it. If that kicks off properly, then we could expect high inflation. We're already banked in for a high inflationary environment anyway, but proper high inflation because supply chains will be cut. You can expect gold to nearly double. Gold did 50% increase in the last 12 months. So you can expect gold to either keep that trajectory or accelerate. And once upon a time, I would have thought oil would really spike in price, maybe, but that's more a Middle Eastern thing. And gas is already plentiful. So I don't see any issues there, but I see a lot of supply lines being cut, and precious metals and some other things that come from Russia may not be available to us, even if we wanted to buy them. And we buy a lot. We still buy some things from Russia. A lot of the timber in the world that's made use of houses, and specifically marine timber, comes from Russia, from all their forests. So, all right, what is this going to mean, guys? In times like this, there is turmoil in the stock market. Some shares will get a big bid, and my clients would already know that for the last 3 or 4 years we've been positioning ready for this, and we invest substantially in peacekeeping weapons or peacekeeping forces, military items. So we'll try and have a good exposure to military weapons and gold. Effectively, everything else is going to be really hard. Soft commodities are much harder to invest in when you live in Australia, because the ASX and even the New York Stock Exchange is hard to get through. Into particular ETFs, you can't get all the over-the-counter investments. That's the problem about being in Australia. We're very restricted. We don't get the opportunities that a lot of other people get. But there's enough. There's enough to say, well, what's going to happen? What will happen to our dollar, Scott? I don't know. I think if everyone stops buying our rocks, because that's all we sell, then our dollar could substantially decrease. In wartime, there might be a flight to safety where everyone flies into US Treasuries. Gold and US Treasuries. I think Bitcoin might take a bit of a hit because it seems to be still behaving like a NASDAQ proxy. But that's okay. So what are some of the other things that will still hold up okay in wartime? So as I say, wartime, we've sent, here's a scenario, the EU are fighting Russia, the US is trying to stay out of it because they're in the Middle East, they're trying to get rid of China. China's kind of not trying to stay out of it as well, they're getting ready, but if Russia needed them, they just press the button and they would come in, and that would be the end of it. Iran was supplying Russia with a lot of drones, but they've also got their eyes on Israel as well. What are the things where would you have your money? What can we park in besides cash? Because cash is going to get eroded away by inflation. The heavy inflation, you're going to have your purchasing power is going to be dumped. And so that even though the purchasing power of your superannuation fund is going to be dumped too, vice items, alcohol and cigarettes are not going to be less consumed. They may even be more consumed when you have a wartime scenario. Gold is already starting to flee. Gold is already starting to be hoarded. Gold knows that there's problems, and when gold leaves one geographical location, gold is saying, "Hey, these guys may not come out on top, and we need to go back to a more of a safety." So vice like the military will get the bid up. Look, there might be a run on the stock exchange if people don't keep funding the government by buying their bonds. They might look for anything other than bonds, which might be an issue. And there are some countries that are going to have a real problem. The EU and the UK are probably the most problematic with bonds, believe it or not, even though you think the US should be. I think it'll muddle through. Anyway, guys, look, I didn't want to kind of get into too big. It's not doom and gloomy as much as it could be. I'm hopeful that none of these things actually happen, but it is my job, and it's your job to look after your family, to have an understanding of what's going on, and to know that if things do happen, you need to position yourself, your family's wealth. You need to be able to protect it. This is the time to start thinking about protecting things. And so moving some things into precious metals, moving some things into vice-style items, moving some, if you knew that inflation was going to be heavy, if you knew we were going to have a 10 or a 12 or a 15% inflation for 3 or 4 years running because the world is going to go into heavy geopolitical war. We're already at war in finance and trade. Normally kinetic military war comes after that. So it's quite possible we might have a 1 in 3. What are some? So you say to me, "Hey Scott, that's great. Like we're living week to week, or we haven't got much money. Like, what am I going to do?" Well, you know what? Why don't you buy 3 years worth of razors? You know you're going to need them. You know it's going to be. They're probably going to add 20 or 30% on next Christmas, and then 20 or 30% on again. Why don't I get them all now and stock them up? You know you're going to use deodorant. You know it's only going to go up in price. You're going to buy rice. You're going to buy flour. Things that can hold up. These are some like oh Scott, how do I beat inflation, but I can't put money away for investment? Buy things early. buy things early. If you know inflation's coming and you should have experienced this already, this is what you can do. If you've got more savings and you don't want it eroded in fiat currency, like you have a risk because you've lent the money to the bank in your savings account, you've lent the money to the bank to prop it up so it can keep making loans effectively. Like precious metals are the only way I think that you're going to like protect your purchasing power in that fashion, in that environment. So anyway, guys, look, I know this was a long one. A lot of you would have turned off. If you've made it this far, thank you. I'm sorry that I've just kind of rattled off this. It's not a prepared script, but I'm watching what's happening, and I've got a young family as well. I'm trying to make sure that we're at least making some informed decisions, and I'd love you to make those informed decisions too. All right, that's enough from me, guys. Remember, life is a family sport. Give yours an edge. See ya.
Superannuation is every Australian's most important investment. The decisions you make now can have a large impact on when you can afford to retire and the lifestyle you'll enjoy when you do. There are so many companies to pick from for your super, but did you know that you can also manage it yourself? Edge Financial Services can help you take control of your super and plan for retirement with a self-managed super fund. There are many different ways for you to invest in your future. To find out more about investment strategies that will give you the edge in retirement, visit edge.net.au today.